Episode 1. The First Funeral Song. I was 8 years old the first time I heard them sing. It wasn't Sunday, and no bell had called the faithful to gather. The village lay drowned in silence. The kind of silence that clings to your throat and makes you afraid to breathe too loud. But through my open window, sometime past midnight, a melody rose from the church at the edge of town. It wasn't like any hymn I knew. The notes were drawn out, trembling, each voice bending around the other like smoke curling through the rafters of a fire. It sounded less like worship and more like mourning, yet no one had died that day. I remember leaning out into the cold night, trying to make sense of it. The church windows glowed faintly, though I knew no candle should have been lit. And then, as the song reached its aching peak, the voices seemed to shift. They weren't singing to God. They were singing for someone. I swear to you, I heard a name woven in the harmony, though I dared not repeat it. By dawn, the news had spread. Old Marta, who lived alone at the far end of the village, had been found lifeless in her bed. People said it was her time, that she went peacefully. But I remembered the name in the song, the way the voices wrapped around it, as though the choir had carried her across the threshold. I told my father what I'd heard. He slapped the back of my head so hard my teeth clicked. "You never speak of that again," he hissed. "The choir sings only when it must, and if you listen too closely, it may choose to sing for you." That night I buried my curiosity deep, but fear has a way of whispering when you're alone. And I couldn't forget that sound, the sound of voices pulling at something I couldn't see. Weeks passed. Another death came. This time, a farmer crushed beneath his own cart. And again, the choir sang before anyone knew. Their song wasn't consolation. It was announcement. They were heralds of death, not comforters of the living. I asked myself, how could they know? Did they choose? Or did the dead themselves come to claim their place in the melody? The villagers walked with their eyes lowered, pretending not to notice that the choir's voices were always waiting. Some swore that if you caught their song on the wind, it meant your name had already been written in heaven or hell. I didn't want to believe it, but one night, lying in bed with my heart pounding, I heard them again, low, rising, relentless. My chest tightened. I pressed the pillow against my ears, but the sound seeped through like water through stone. And this time I was certain. The name they sang was not distant. It was not whispered. It was clear, piercing, undeniable. It was mine. Episode 2. The Priest Who Never Blinked. The choir did not sing again for many weeks after that night when I heard my own name in their voices. I told myself it had been a dream, a trick of wind and imagination. But then came the funeral, and with it, the man who commanded them. Father Elias. He had always been there, as far back as anyone remembered. His hair was white as frost, yet his face bore no wrinkles. He walked slowly, deliberately, like a man carrying invisible chains, and when he lifted his hands, the choir obeyed without hesitation. I stood in the back of the church during the service, peering over the heads of the mourners. The air was thick with incense, but beneath the perfume I smelled something raw, like damp soil freshly unearthed. Father Elias raised his arms, and the choir began. Their mouths opened wide, but my eyes locked on him, on his eyes. He never blinked, not once, not through the entire hymn that lasted longer than any child's patience could bear. His gaze swept across us all, but it never faltered, never softened. It was as though he wasn't truly seeing us, but measuring us like cattle in a pen. I remember the sound of their voices that day, stronger than the first night I'd heard them. The notes climbed so high the stained glass windows shivered. The old women clutched their rosaries tighter, and the men bowed their heads lower, as if by refusing to look, they could pretend the music wasn't peeling back the skin of their souls. And then, as the hymn reached its last chord, Father Elias's gaze caught mine. I froze, my knees buckled, and I stumbled back against the wall. For a moment, the choir's voices seemed to fall away, leaving only silence and the sound of my heart hammering in my ears. His eyes, pale gray, like stone ground into dust, were fixed on me, still unblinking, still measuring. After the service, I lingered outside, waiting for him to pass. When he finally emerged, the choir trailing behind like shadows, I mustered the courage to whisper, "Father, how do you know the songs?" He stopped. His head turned slowly, the choir halting in perfect unison. His lips did not move, but a voice, low, hoarse, and thick as grave dirt slid into my ear. We do not sing to know. We sing because it is written. The dead arrive only when called. And then he walked on, leaving me shaking in the cold. That night, I dreamt of him again. His pale eyes hovered in the dark like moons without light. I woke with the taste of earth in my mouth, as if I'd been buried alive. From that day, I could never look at Father Elias the same way, because I understood something dreadful, something no one dared to say aloud. The choir might have been their voices, but the song always began with his eyes. Episode 3. The Child Who Sang in Her Sleep. After the funeral, I swore I would not think of the choir again. But silence has its own cruelty. It leaves too much room for memory. And memory, in our village, was always tied to death. It was during one of those restless nights that I heard her. The voice was faint at first, like a bird trapped beneath the floorboards. I thought it must have been the choir again, slipping its way into my dreams. But when I pressed my ear to the wall, I realized it wasn't coming from the church at all. It was coming from the orphanage. The building was a stone's throw from my father's house, and its windows flickered dim with candlelight. I crept out, bare feet against the dirt, and the closer I came, the clearer the sound grew. A child was singing. Her voice was fragile, almost too pure, the way glass seems most beautiful just before it breaks. She wasn't awake. I saw her through the cracked window, sitting upright in her bed, eyes closed, lips parted. The tune that spilled from her mouth was not her own. It was the very same melody the choir had sung inside the church. I held my breath as she lingered on a single note, long and trembling, and then, like a whisper hidden in the music, another voice joined hers, deeper, older, not from her throat, from somewhere else. By morning, the village woke to terrible news. A shepherd had been found dead in the fields, his flock scattered, his body rigid and pale beneath the rising sun. The child had sung his name. I told myself it had to be coincidence, but when I returned the next night, unable to resist the pull of horror, she sang again. This time I heard the name before I saw the consequence. 3 days later, a woman drowned in the well. The villagers began to whisper. They said the girl was chosen, that the choir had found its vessel. Some wanted to send her away, but Father Elias kept her close. He stood by her bed each dawn, hand raised in silent blessing, though his eyes, those eyes that never blinked, watched not with pity, but with hunger. I dared to approach him once when the child's voice carried into the night so loud it woke the dogs. "Father," I whispered, "why does she sing?" He leaned down until his breath grazed my ear. "The dead cannot come unless the living opens the door," he said, "and children are the easiest doors of all." That night, the girl's song wove through my sleep again, a thread pulling tighter and tighter until I awoke gasping. For a moment, I thought it was only a nightmare. But then I realized her song had changed. This time she wasn't singing for someone else. She was singing for me. Episode 4. The Songbook of Bones. It was the girl who led me to it, not with words. She hardly spoke at all when awake, but with her voice. One night her song was different. It was not the familiar hymn that slithered like smoke from the choir. No, this was sharper, fragmented, like broken glass arranged into a pattern only she understood. I followed the sound, drawn as though some invisible hand had taken hold of my chest. She sang me straight to the church. The heavy doors groaned open without a touch, and the nave lay steeped in darkness. Only the altar was faintly lit, a single candle fighting against the shadows. I knew I should turn back, but the girl's melody tugged me forward until my knees bent before the altar. That's when I saw it. A book, resting on the stone like a patient heart waiting to be opened. Its cover wasn't leather, not really. It was too pale, too smooth. I reached out, and the instant my fingers brushed it, a chill shot through me. The pages were thick, brittle, and they were not written with ink. The words shimmered faintly, etched in a powdery substance that clung to my skin when I touched it. White, grainy, with a smell that turned my stomach. Bone dust. It was a hymnal, but every song was incomplete. Notes ended abruptly. Words stopped mid-sentence, as if waiting for someone to finish them. And in the margins, names were written. Names I recognized. Marta, the farmer, the shepherd, the drowned woman, the dead. Their deaths weren't accidents. They were verses. I slammed the book shut, but it was too late. The air shifted. Behind me, the choir stirred in the shadows, their faces pale, eyes hollow. mouths closed yet humming with a vibration that rattled my teeth. Father Elias stepped forward, his gaze locked on mine. "You shouldn't have touched it," he said softly. His lips moved this time, but I swear the voice was not his own. The songbook keeps balance. Every note, every name. To silence the choir is to silence death itself. And you know what must be paid for silence. I backed away, clutching my chest, but the girl was there in the doorway, her eyes glassy, her lips already shaping a new melody. I understood then. Each page would only be completed when another life was claimed. And the choir, they weren't mourning the dead. They were keeping score. The candle on the altar guttered and went out. In the dark, the hymn began again. This time I didn't just hear it, I felt it, crawling under my skin, searching for a place to right itself. I staggered out of the church, but the song followed me into the night, and I knew, with a terror that froze. Episode 5. The choir that stood in the graveyard. The dead should stay in the ground, at least that's what we told ourselves. But the choir had other ideas. It was a moonless night when I heard them again. The sound did not pour from the church walls as usual. No, this time, the music drifted from the open earth itself, a vibration so low it seemed to tremble through the soles of my feet. I followed it, heart thundering, until I reached the cemetery that crouched like a sleeping beast at the edge of town. They were waiting for me. The choir stood between the crooked stones, white robes glowing faintly as if the moon had returned only for them. Their mouths opened, and the night split. The hymn rolled over the graves, a tide of voices rising and falling in perfect, merciless unison. I hid behind an angel statue whose wings were chipped away by time. From there, I watched the impossible. The ground stirred. At first, it was only the grass flattening as though pressed by unseen hands. Then the soil began to heave, gravestones tilting as the earth groaned. I expected corpses to claw free, bones and rot dragging into the moonlight, but nothing broke the surface. Instead, the dead answered from beneath. It was not a sound meant for human ears. A deep, muffled chorus, like water rushing through caverns, seeped from the ground. The choir sang above, and the graves replied below, a dreadful harmony between worlds. I clamped my hands to my ears, but the voices pushed through, vibrating inside my skull. And in their rhythm, I heard words, not in any language I knew, but in meaning so clear it made bile rise in my throat. They are not gone, they are waiting. Then Father Elias appeared. He walked among the choir like a shepherd among sheep, his eyes pale lanterns that pierced every shadow. He raised a hand, and at once the voices hushed. The silence that followed was worse, as though the world itself was holding its breath. He stopped before a fresh grave. The dirt was still loose, the cross at its head barely upright. He leaned down, touched the soil, and whispered a name. The earth shivered. A cry, wet, raw, human, burst from below. It wasn't the voice of the dead. It was the scream of someone alive. I stumbled back, horror clawing my chest. Had they buried someone breathing? Or worse, had the hymn stolen a living soul and locked it underground? The choir's song rose again, drowning the scream, swallowing it whole. And when the hymn ended, silence fell. The grave lay still, untouched, as though nothing had ever stirred within it. Father Elias turned then, his unblinking eyes sweeping across the cemetery. For a breathless moment, I thought he saw me. Perhaps he did, because that night as I fled through the dark, the choir's song clung to me like grave soil on skin. And I knew, if they could make the dead answer, they could make the living listen, even against our will. Episode 6. The Widow Who Refused the Song. The village had always bowed to the choir. No one questioned, no one resisted, until her. Her name was Elena. She was the widow of Tomas, the blacksmith whose hammer once rang louder than the church bells themselves. Tomas had died suddenly, crushed beneath an iron beam, his body mangled beyond recognition. The people whispered it was an accident. Elena whispered nothing. Her silence was louder than grief. When the day of the funeral came, the choir gathered as always, robes trailing like spilled milk across the church floor. Father Elias raised his hand, signaling for the hymn to begin. But Elena stepped forward, her veil drawn back, her eyes red but unyielding. "No," she said. The word was small, but it sliced through the incense-thick air like a blade. Gasps rippled through the congregation. No one had ever dared to speak against the choir. Father Elias did not blink. "The song is for his soul," he said, though his voice was softer than I expected, as though testing her resolve. Elena lifted her chin. "His soul belongs to God, not to you. You will not sing for him." The choir shifted uneasily. For the first time, their voices faltered before they rose. Elias's hand hovered in the air, frozen. And then, slowly, he lowered it. The silence that followed was unbearable, a silence not of peace, but of defiance. They buried Tomas without music. No hymn, no harmony, only the sound of dirt striking wood. But that night, something happened. I woke to screams tearing through the village streets. Elena's house glowed with a sickly light, as though the walls themselves had caught fire. I ran with the others, and what I saw still coils in my stomach. The windows trembled, every pane vibrating with sound. The house itself was singing. The walls groaned, the beams moaned, and from deep inside, a chorus swelled, low, guttural, relentless. The same hymn the widow had denied. Elena stood in the doorway, hair wild, eyes wide with terror. "Do you hear it?" she cried. "They've put their voices in the wood, in the stone! They're singing for him through my house." Her neighbors tried to calm her, but the sound grew louder. The ground beneath our feet hummed as if the earth itself had joined in. And then, with a crack like a bone snapping, Elena's roof split open. From the rafters spilled not fire, not smoke, but sound, an avalanche of voices pouring into the night. Elena fell to her knees, clawing at her ears, sobbing. "You can't have him," she screamed. "You can't take him from me." But the hymn did not stop. It filled every crevice, every shadow, until the whole village vibrated with its mournful rage. By dawn, the house was silent again, but Elena was gone. No one found her body, only the veil she'd worn at Tomas's funeral, pinned to the church door by nails that no one dared to remove. And from that day on, no widow, no parent, no child ever tried to silence the choir again, because we had learned the truth. Refusing their song did not save the dead, it only doomed the living. Episode 7, The Funeral Without a Body. The church bell tolled at dawn, slow and heavy, its echo carrying across the fields. Another funeral. But this one was different. When I stepped into the nave, I felt it immediately. The air was wrong. People whispered in hushed tones, their eyes darting nervously toward the altar. There was no body, no coffin, only a long black cloth stretched across the bier, as if draping emptiness itself. Father Elias stood beside it, hands folded, unblinking eyes scanning the congregation. "We gather," he said, "for a soul that has departed, though flesh has not yet been given." A chill ran down my spine. Whose funeral was this if no one had died? The choir filed in silently, robes brushing against the stone floor. They took their places, mouths closed, waiting. I had grown used to their presence, but something about their stillness now felt unbearable, as if they were wolves crouched before a hunt. Elias raised his hand. The first note cut through the silence, sharp and merciless. The choir's voices swelled, building a hymn that seemed to groan beneath its own weight. It was not mourning, it was summoning. And then, in the middle of that dreadful harmony, I heard it. A name, clear, carved in the melody like a blade in flesh. The villagers gasped. I turned, searching for the poor soul marked by the song, but no one moved. All stood frozen, eyes wide, mouths trembling. The hymn grew louder. Windows rattled, the candles on the altar bent sideways as though pushed by invisible breath. And then, silence. The choir stopped mid-note, severing the sound so suddenly it left ringing in my ears. Father Elias lowered his hand. Slowly, deliberately, he looked out across the congregation. His gaze settled on one man, the miller, pale and sweating at the back of the church. Before anyone could speak, the doors burst open. A group of fishermen staggered inside, carrying something between them. A body, soaked, limp, hair tangled with river weeds. The miller's son. He had been found floating face down in the water just minutes before. The congregation erupted in wails, but I could not cry. My stomach clenched with horror, for I had understood the truth. The choir had sung not for the dead, but to announce him. They sang before the living became the dead. The song was not a farewell, it was a verdict. I glanced at the bier. The black cloth still covered the empty space, as if it had been waiting all along. The fisherman laid the drowned boy there, And in that moment, I swear the cloth seemed to sigh in relief, like a mouth closing after being fed. Father Elias raised his hand once more. The choir began again, their voices smoother now, almost content, as though their work had been completed. And I realized with a dread so deep it hollowed me out, there would be more empty funerals, more songs for bodies not yet found. Because the choir did not follow death. It preceded it. Episode 8. The choir's silent feast. It was after the funeral without a body that I began to notice the hunger in their eyes. Not just Father Elias, though his gaze was always starved, devouring the souls of the living, but the choir itself. They moved like people hollowed out, like mouths waiting to be filled. And then came the feast. It was whispered among the villagers that the choir held a secret gathering once every season, when the moon vanished and the earth turned black. Few believed it. Fewer dared to find out. But one night, curiosity dragged me through the shadows until I reached the crypt beneath the church. The air was thick, heavy with the smell of wax and damp stone. I followed the flicker of light down the steps, my heart hammering so hard I thought it would give me away. And then, through a crack in the door, I saw them. The choir sat in a perfect circle. A long wooden table stretched before them, but it bore no food. No bread, no wine, no flesh. Only closed coffins. 3 of them. They did not speak. They did not even move their lips. And yet a sound filled the chamber, low, resonant, vibrating through the stone like the beating of an enormous heart. It came from the coffins. The dead were singing. Their voices spilled from within the wooden boxes, weaving a harmony both suffocating and beautiful. The choir did not answer. They only leaned forward, trembling, as if drinking the sound with their very bones. Each note that rose seemed to feed them, flesh returning to their cheeks, light flickering in their eyes. Father Elias stood at the head of the table, hands outstretched, as though conducting the invisible choir below. He whispered words I could not understand, words that bent the air until the lids of the coffins began to quake. The song swelled. It grew louder, fiercer, until the stone floor beneath me rattled. And then, one coffin cracked open. I saw pale lips move inside. Though no breath misted the air, the corpse sang with a devotion so violent it made the living quake. And the choir fed, not with teeth, but with silence. They opened their mouths, wide and empty, letting the voices of the dead pour into them. A grotesque communion, a feast without flesh, where sound itself was the meal. I stumbled back, bile rising in my throat, but my foot struck the door. The noise echoed through the crypt. The singing stopped. All heads turned toward me, dozens of eyes wide, glimmering with a light that did not belong to the living. Even the corpse in the coffin stared. Father Elias's lips curled, not in a smile, but in something sharper, hungrier. "You've seen the feast," he said. His voice was a rasp of stone against stone. "Now you must learn what it means to starve." The choir's mouths opened again, not in song, but in silence so deep it roared. My ears bled, my vision blurred. And then, blackness. When I awoke, I was alone at the top of the crypt stairs. The door was sealed behind me, but from below, faintly, I could still hear them feeding. Episode 9. The Song That Named the Living. There is a terror deeper than death itself. Hearing your name sung before you are ready to leave the world. I learned that truth the night the choir called me. It began quietly. I was walking home, the air damp with the smell of rain, when the first note touched me. It was not carried by wind or echo. It slipped directly into my ear, intimate as a whisper. At first I thought I imagined it, but then another note joined, and another, until a harmony bloomed around me, though no voice could be seen. The choir was not in the church. They were in me. I stumbled down the road, pressing my palms to my ears, yet the sound burrowed through bone and blood. My name, rose in the melody, stretched, repeated, carried as though angels had turned executioners. The villagers heard nothing. They passed by with baskets and torches, unbothered, their eyes dulled with routine. Only I felt the pull, the terrible certainty that the hymn had chosen me. I ran. The song followed. It bent the world around me. The trees leaned closer, branches rattling in rhythm. The cobblestones vibrated like drum beats beneath my feet. My lungs burned, but the music never tired. It clung, relentless, until finally I collapsed at the edge of the cemetery. There they were. The choir stood among the graves, white robes billowing, though there was no wind. Their mouths moved in perfect unison, and from their throats poured my own name. Each syllable was carved, stretched, nailed to the hymn like a body hung on a cross. At their center was Father Elias. His pale eyes glowed faintly, and when he raised his hand, the hymn deepened into something monstrous. "You cannot run from the song." His voice slithered inside me. "The living must learn they are already written." The ground shifted, the soil trembled, and then another voice joined the hymn. Mine. It spilled from my lips without my consent, an echo of their chant, my name twisted in my own throat. I tried to stop, to bite my tongue, to choke it back, but the hymn forced itself through me. I was part of it now. The graves around us stirred. Dirt cracked. Fingers, skeletal, gray, trembling, clawed upward. The dead answered the call, not for themselves, but for me. I screamed, and for a moment the song faltered. My scream broke their harmony, tore through the rhythm. Father Elias's eyes narrowed, but his lips curled in cruel satisfaction. "You are strong," he said, his voice layered with dozens of others. "That is why you were chosen." The choir stopped suddenly, as if cut by an unseen blade. Silence dropped heavy, suffocating. And then, as quickly as it began, they turned from me. The graves closed. The voices died. My name lingered only as an echo in my skull. I fell to the ground, shaking, gasping, knowing one truth I could never forget. The choir did not simply sing for the dead. They sang to claim the living. Episode 10. The Cross That Trembled. I thought I had escaped their song after that night in the graveyard. But the choir does not let go. They wait, patient as worms beneath the soil, until you step too close again. And I did. It was Sunday morning when Father Elias summoned us all. The church doors yawned wide and the congregation shuffled inside, eyes hollow with dread. We feared sermons now. We feared silence even more. The great wooden cross hung above the altar, a weight that seemed to watch us. I had prayed before it countless times as a child, its beams steady, unyielding. But that morning it looked different. Cracks veined across the wood, faint but spreading, like lines etched into brittle skin. The choir gathered. Elias raised his hand, and the hymn began. It was louder than usual, merciless, thunderous, filling every crevice of the church. The stained glass rattled, the pews vibrated, and then, with a groan that silenced even the boldest prayer, the cross began to move. It trembled, at first just a shiver, almost invisible, but then it shook violently, swaying on its chains as if something inside the wood clawed to break free. Dust rained down, peppering the congregation. Women screamed, children buried their faces in their mothers' skirts. Yet the choir sang on, unbroken, their voices climbing higher, faster, crushing the air. I looked up. The cracks widened, and beneath the splintered wood, I saw something glint. Bone. It jutted through the wood like veins of marble. Ribs and fragments fused into the cross itself. The truth clawed into me. The cross was not built of holy oak. It was built of bodies, pressed and bound together, their marrow sealing the wood like glue. The hymn rose to a climax. The cross bucked violently as though alive, and for a moment I swore I heard it scream, not with wood, but with voices of those entombed within it. I staggered forward, drawn by horror more than faith, and my hand brushed the base of the altar. A vibration coursed through me, hot and furious, like 1,000 voices clawing at my veins. The cross above me twisted on its chain, and I knew if it fell, it would not just crush us, it would open, and whatever lay inside would not stay silent. Father Elias's eyes never left the cross. He did not stop the hymn. If anything, he drove them harder, his raised hand quivering with power. He wanted it to break. I couldn't breathe. The choir's song pressed into my lungs, filling me with air not my own. My knees buckled, my head spun, and just when the cross seemed ready to split wide and rain bones upon us, the hymn stopped. Silence struck like a blade. The cross sagged back, still trembling but whole. Dust settled. The congregation collapsed into gasping sobs. Elias lowered his hand, his gaze sweeping over us like a knife across throats. And then he whispered, "It is not finished. The cross trembles for the one who will open it." His eyes found mine, and I knew who he meant. Episode 11. The Choir That Sang Backwards. There are songs meant to lift souls upward, to carry the faithful into light. But the choir had no interest in light. One night they sang in reverse. I should have been asleep, yet something dragged me from my bed. The sound of words tumbling over themselves, collapsing, as though language had been turned inside out. It came from the church, but the tones did not flow like melody. They stumbled, they unraveled. It was a hymn eaten alive by its own echo. I crept toward the nave, every step weighted with dread. The doors stood ajar, and through the crack I saw them, the choir. Their robes pale under candlelight, mouths moving in strange rhythm. Their voices cascaded downward like a staircase spiraling into the dark. They weren't singing forward. They were dragging the song backward, each note reversing, unmaking itself. The effect was immediate. The air warped, bending as if unseen hands twisted it. Faces in the congregation slackened, eyes rolling white, lips trembling. Some began to echo the reversed hymn, stammering nonsense that wasn't nonsense at all, but perfectly aligned with the choir's backwards chant. I pressed myself to the wall, fighting the pull. The sound gnawed at my mind, unraveling memories, peeling thoughts apart like parchment burning edge to center. I felt myself slipping until my mother's voice rose in me. Long dead but fierce. Hold on. I bit my tongue until blood filled my mouth. The metallic taste anchored me in the storm, but the others weren't so lucky. A man in the front row stood abruptly, his eyes vacant. He turned to face us, and with a voice not his own, he screamed the hymn backward. His body convulsed, twisted, until with a sickening crack, his head spun too far and he collapsed, lifeless. No one moved to help him. They couldn't. The backwards hymn had hollowed them out. At the altar, Father Elias raised both hands. His eyes blazed, brighter than ever. The choir's chant deepened, so low the walls themselves shook, and the stained glass rattled like teeth in a skull. The dead answered, not from beneath the ground this time, but from within the people themselves. Their voices seeped through living throats, snarled backward prayers spilling out as the villagers clawed their own faces, trying to escape the sound rising from inside. I fled, stumbling into the night air, my ears bleeding, my mind trembling on the edge of ruin. Behind me the church bellowed with that inverted hymn, a roar of chaos and mockery, as if God himself had been forced to hear his own name spoken in reverse. And when at last it ended, silence swept across the village like a gravecloth. Doors opened. People staggered out, dazed, bloodied, but alive. Alive, but not the same. Because from then on, whenever they spoke, I could still hear it. The hymn, whispering backward through their words. Episode 12. The Last Song for the Living. By the time the 12th song came, the village was already a graveyard pretending to breathe. No one smiled anymore. No laughter echoed between the houses. Every step was heavy, every prayer hurried, as if words alone could outrun what was coming. But deep down we all knew. The choir had stopped singing for the dead. Their voices hunted only the living. It was midnight when the bells tolled, though no hand touched the rope. The sound was not bronze but bone, rattling across rooftops, shaking us from our beds. I stumbled outside with the others, drawn by a force we could neither fight nor name. The church stood ablaze with candlelight, every window glowing like an open eye. The doors swung wide, and Father Elias beckoned us in with a gesture that was less invitation than command. Inside, the choir waited. Their robes were no longer white but stained, dark streaks running like veins across fabric. They stood in perfect silence until Elias raised both hands. Then it began. The hymn was unlike any before. It carried no mourning, no farewell. It was not for Marta or Tomas or the miller's son. It was for us, all of us. I felt my name pulled from my chest, woven into the song like a thread in a shroud. Around me, others clutched their throats. Hearing themselves echoed back, distorted, claimed. The music devoured identity, swallowing who we were and spitting it back as part of its endless harmony. And then the ground split. The floorboards of the church cracked open, revealing nothing but blackness beneath. From the abyss rose voices, thousands, maybe millions, shrieking, chanting, begging. The dead had come not to rest, but to join. The choir sang louder, their mouths stretched too wide, unhinged, as the dead poured their song upward, meeting ours in the middle. The sound was unbearable, yet irresistible. dragging my voice into its tide until I was screaming my own name as if I no longer owned it. Father Elias's eyes fixed on me. He stepped closer, the hymn vibrating in his very bones, and whispered over the thunder, "The last song is not sung for those who have passed. It is sung for those who must follow." The floor beneath me gave way. For an instant I dangled above the void, faces writhing in the darkness below, mouths open in eternal chorus. I should have fallen. I should have been claimed. But something stopped me. The hymn wavered, just for a heartbeat. My scream, raw, defiant, had broken their rhythm again. The music stuttered, the floor sealed shut, and I collapsed onto the stone, gasping. When I looked up, the choir had gone silent. Their mouths hung open, but no sound emerged. Father Elias stared at me, unblinking, and in his eyes I saw something I had never seen before. Fear. For the first time, the hymn had failed, and I knew then that the last song was not yet finished, because it waited for me to sing it. Episode 13, The Choir That Waits for You. I have not returned to the church since that night. The village still stands, though it feels less like a home and more like the hollow shell of a place abandoned by God. Doors stay locked, windows shuttered, prayers whispered in secret. We live as though silence itself might save us, though we all know silence is only a pause before the next song. The choir has not sung in weeks, but their absence is worse than their presence, because I feel them waiting. When I walk through the streets, shadows stretch too far, bending as if pulled by invisible hands. At night, I hear faint vibrations in the walls, like a breath held too long. And when I close my eyes, I see them, rows of white-robed figures, mouths open, no sound spilling out, as though saving their voices for the moment they decide it is time. Father Elias no longer speaks to the villagers. He stands at the church door, eyes fixed on nothing, as if he sees beyond us all. Sometimes I catch his gaze, and I know what he is thinking. He is waiting for me to finish the song. That night in the church, when my scream broke their hymn, something shifted. I became part of their music without meaning to. My voice, my name, it slipped into their score. And now, whether I like it or not, I carry the final note inside me. It festers in my throat. It vibrates in my bones. At times, when the world grows too still, I feel my lips moving against my will, forming syllables that do not belong to me. I wake in the dark, the taste of soil on my tongue, the echo of graves in my chest. I know what it means. The choir no longer sings for the dead. They no longer even sing for the living. They sing for me. They are waiting for me to open my mouth, to let the last hymn pass through me, to release what has been locked inside since the cross trembled, since the girl sang in her sleep, since the songbook of bones revealed its pages. And when that happens, it will not just be my name they claim. It will be yours. Yes, yours, listening now. You think you are safe, sitting in your quiet room, believing this story is only words. But songs travel farther than words. They cling to the air, seep into the cracks of walls, coil around your ears until you cannot tell if the sound is inside or outside. So listen closely. Do you hear it? That faint hum beneath your heartbeat? That whisper curling in the silence between my words? The choir is patient, and the next name they sing may not be mine. It may be yours.
Epilogue, the choir that never ends. The village is quiet now. Too quiet. No bells. No hymns. No footsteps gathering at dawn. Only silence, thick, heavy, suffocating. You might think peace has returned, but silence is not peace. Silence is waiting. Father Elias no longer stands at the church door. The choir no longer roams the graveyard. Their robes have vanished from the pews, their pale faces from the shadows. Some say they left with the wind. Others whisper they returned to the graves they once awakened. But I know the truth. They did not vanish. They are listening. Sometimes, in the dead of night, I feel it, the vibration of a note pressing against my ribs, begging to escape. My name still lingers in their melody, unfinished. A single thread dangling from a tapestry that stretches far beyond our village. And I am not the only one. A child mutters strange cadences in her sleep. A farmer hums while plowing, though he swears he hears no tune. A widow scrubs her floor and realizes the rhythm of her hands matches a hymn she has never learned. The choir's silence has only scattered their song. It lives in us now, hidden in the cracks of our voices, waiting for the moment when enough of us unknowingly hum the same note. Then the hymn will return, not from the church, but from every throat at once. Sometimes I dream of leaving, of escaping to lands where no one has heard their voices. But deep down I know it would be useless. Songs do not obey walls or distance. They travel like smoke, curling into ears unguarded, waiting for the moment when silence is too heavy to bear. And then it begins again. The last time I passed the church, the great cross still trembled faintly, as though some heartbeat pulsed inside it. The cracks have widened. Bone glistens beneath the wood. I know it will not stay sealed forever. When it breaks, when the final note is sung, it will not just claim me or this village. It will spread, a hymn that leaps from mouth to mouth, until every living voice becomes part of the choir that was never meant for the living at all. You think you are safe because you are far, because you are only listening. But even now, you carry it. The rhythm of your pulse, the cadence of your breath, it is already the beginning of their song. And when the silence around you grows too deep, when you hear the faintest hum in the walls or in your own chest, you will realize what I have always known. The choir never ends. It only waits for you to join.